Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm hoping you guys are all having a fantastic day. So today's video, I want to talk about the pattern and what to expect. So they're having a few adjustments, mainly kind of refining of details, but really the areas that were expected to see cold will still see quite a bit of chilly temperatures and a lot of contrasts between kind of the heat and the cold, almost equaling in magnitude on both sides of the spectrum. So very interesting, and I want to talk about that in today's video. Kind of give a brief rundown. If you perhaps by the end of this video like what you're seeing, or already saw a couple of my videos and you liked what you were seeing, subscribing would be awesome. So consider doing that if you'd like. And liking the video is also a great way to support the channel. So let's start off by looking at the European model, ECMWF. And notice right now we are at negative 72 hours. I kind of want to show you what already happened. So this was Wednesday, October 14th, a few days ago. And right now I'm recording this Saturday, early Saturday. Notice what we have is a lot of warm air and minimal presence of cooler air, but as I push this forward, we see quite a good air mass of cooler air move into the Midwest and northern plains. The warm air that was originally there kind of slides out, pushes into the east. A pretty generous air mass in terms of cool air. This brought many frosts and freezes to a good portion of the plains and the Midwest. I had a freeze watch for my area, my location, but we actually did not get any frost damage at all. That's mainly to do with the urban heat island effect of the city of Chicago, but I know outside locations did get a bit more bitten up by that, but you can see that this, compared to what may come, is relatively nothing. So get prepared what I'm about to show you in the long range. It could be a bit surprising. This is what we have as of right now, as of recording the video. Right there, that slide. The cool air that was in place for much of the plains is still really there. It's starting to push out of places like Wyoming, Montana, eastern Colorado, northern Utah, and move into the eastern United States. You could see that the East Coast itself doesn't see a lot of cool air, and it's really nothing too significant, and it's mainly kind of really eaten up by cool air, or warm air. As we push into Sunday and into Monday, right between this little break right here where we have the warm air infiltrating in, we have a storm system that takes advantage of this break, and it pushes inwards, and you can see that kind of breaks off that initial piece from the secondary piece. You can see those temperature contrasts across Montana, the northwest, or the southern Canada, southwest of Canada. We see some pretty chilly air. This keeps really relatively limited to just the northern plains and upper Midwest. It doesn't really make its way far into the eastern United States, and that's because of some increased storm activity, and with low pressures they spin counterclockwise. So if they're positioned at a right position, which they will be in this case, they spin up warm air from the south and almost fight back the cooler air, really not allowing it to come back as efficiently as it otherwise would if it was a non-resistant pattern, if you will. Notice that while it does get held back for quite a while, in fact some of these locations end up seeing above average temperatures for brief periods, it's very cool across the northern United States and the northern plains, and this heat is relatively short lasting. As we push this even further into the forecast, we see a bit of that cooler air start to make its way down, but really it starts accelerating as we push this forwards. You can see the contrasts grow on both sides. As I made a couple of videos, there could be a lot of storm systems, right? So this warm air is constantly fighting with this cool air. I mean, that's very cold air right there. That is very hot air right there, at least for this time of the year. And we continue doing this for a while. They kind of dance around. You can see the cold air does kind of override that. Warm air pushes it out. We have a storm system right there, the warm front to the cold front. That allows the cold air to spill into much of the northern and even southern United States. Maybe just the coastal areas getting exempt from the cool air. The West, really, it depends at what time frame. It varies, and it varies from model run and from the models themselves. So I would say if you live in Southern California, Arizona, Phoenix, most likely expect above average conditions. If you live a bit further to the north, closer to Utah, Salt Lake, you could see some brief infiltrations of chillier air, but mainly dominated by warmer air. again, we push this into next weekend, Sunday, Saturday. We see much of that cool air spill in, and you can see at this point in time, it actually spills in pretty far to the south and starts intensifying quite significantly. You know, some of these anomalies right here are pretty ridiculously cold, and that's reaching into the almost negative 15 Celsius, which is even more if you were to convert that to Fahrenheit. I don't know the exact conversion rate, so I don't want to mislead, but definitely within the negative 20 to 25 degrees below Fahrenheit. A few locations obviously seeing probably into the negative 30 below Fahrenheit. Below average, sorry, not below zero, not negative 30. We're not seeing that yet. We might at some point in the winter, probably will, but negative 30. So if your average is 30, you would be seeing around zero. And some of the models are showing that. You may be looking at this and being like, okay, so he just hooked onto one model run. He doesn't want to show us the rest. Well, as you can see that from today's noon model run, there was quite a bit of chilly air across the Midwest, and it was actually sending a bit further to the south. So a lot of these models are still showing very cool air, and the model runs. They have been consistently showing this very, very, very chilly air. I mean, this would bring frost and freezes to where this pink area is showing right here, Tennessee, Kentucky. So definitely a bit early, but you know, that there's years where you know, the average, for example, in Chicago is October 15th. We see years where it's earlier. We see years where it's later. The average is October 15th. And this was the prior model run on. Sorry, I wanted to show you 0 o'clock Friday. So the midnight model run yesterday, you can see showed up again quite a bit of that cool air. And in fact, it has just kind of continuously intensified that cool air. Let's take a look at the ensembles, the European ensembles, a whole ensemble of... How many times can I use an ensemble in one sentence? Let's see. All right, but this basically is a whole group of European lake models, and they kind of provide a averaged outlook at the temperatures. Again, we saw our first blast move into the U.S. this early or this late week and into this weekend. That moves out into the east. A little bit of warm air infiltrates, fights back with that chillier air. You can see that the EPS, the ensembles, definitely keep it relatively close to what the European shows, maybe keeping the cooler air a bit more further to the south, but really it's by such a small margin that it's nothing significant. And sorry about that. And I would say that the European does a pretty good job of representing what the ensembles are showing as a whole. And notice, yeah, the warm air does push back, but eventually the heat or the cold air wins out. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, some of these contrasts will be pretty interesting to see. We could be looking, 60s, 70s, maybe a few 80s across these locations. 24 hours later, they could be looking at 32 below freezing. So definitely interesting, but eventually obviously they do push that cooler air in some locations at some pretty strong intensity. So definitely a interesting thing to see, especially since we have agreement. It seems more likely. Let's move on to the GFS. This is a whole new group, kind of like a whole new little party of models that is basically showing the same information just with a different aspect, and sometimes different models disagree, and we don't like to see that. That usually, lowers the confidence. But in this case, we get our confidence raised because of the agreement they do show. Notice we do have that first air mass that moves out really anywhere north of, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, even northern Wisconsin. It'll just be constantly in a chillier air mass, while really the kind of the central Midwest, Ohio Valley, and portions of the Ozarks really fight for kind of that warm air. And this is the GFS ensembles again. They briefly push in that second air mass after the weekend's storm, but it quickly gets limited, kind of stops at around the Indianapolis, St. Louis, maybe kind of that Columbia area in Missouri, and it starts pushing back to the north. The cooler air pushes back to the north, and again, we see some pretty stark contrast. We don't see, warmer versus less warmer. We see warmer versus much cooler than average. So the contrast will be high. Not healthy, but unfortunately that's the case. And again, you can see that the GFS models are showing a pretty big fight back in some locations. So if you live in Illinois, Indiana, and you're watching this forecast, and next Thursday you're looking at 70s, you may be looking at this being like, what on earth was he talking about? Well, if this does happen and then next Thursday you are looking at warm temperatures, that's good news because that shows that this forecast was accurate. But also, don't get caught off guard. The cold air would be on the way. And again, you already experienced probably a bit of that chilly air, and some of the more northern locations of the Midwest, the plains, Ohio Valley, maybe seeing some cooler conditions this late weekend, getting pushed back by warmer conditions. But then, of course, the inevitable happens. Kind of this air mass is. It's almost like if this warm air is kind of keeping that cool air on top of its shoulders. Eventually, it collapses, gets weaker while this vortex kind of grows stronger, and the cool air pushes in. The Gfs models are definitely a bit less confident on that cooler air, but this is further out than what the European shows. So generally, for that time frame of 240, they are in very well agreement. What happens after is a mystery, and we will have to see. As again, it's hard to see a consistently cold pattern, and we often see breaks. I mean, the first 15 days of October here in Chicago were relatively warm, mild, and nothing to complain about. GFS parallel, this is kind of like a separate singular model. Let's take a look at what it's showing in terms of 2-meter temperatures. Yeah, you can see some locations seeing at moments ridiculously warm temperatures, and moments later, quite literally in meteorological moments, we see much cooler air. You can see Chicago at around midnight, Tuesday into Wednesday of next week. Could be looking, or sorry, 2 weeks out. So this is pretty far out, but 70s, 60s, and then minutes later, you can see, not minutes, but hours later, into the 30s and 20s. So a stark change is basically a good way to describe what's to come across the United States. And even once the change does take place, you can get ready for some more changes, as all of these models show all sorts of weird manipulations of the forecast. The GFS by itself, if you were to look at it, we have the cool air right now, warm air to the south. Already now we are looking at quite a bit of a contrast. You can see warm, cool. I wouldn't say this is anything near compared to what we may be looking at as we push this in time. Look at that. We just see very contrasting sides, warm, very cold, and at times the cold air just is ridiculous across portions of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. This is some temperatures that would bring close to 0 Fahrenheit if this were to appear. Many locations, again, seeing you can see 6, 7, 9, and obviously in the higher elevations it would be almost below 0 in terms of Fahrenheit. That is very cold, especially for those that use a Celsius. 0 in Fahrenheit is much more colder than 0 in Celsius. 0 in Celsius is around 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the freezing point of water, while 0 Fahrenheit is, I don't know the exact translation of Celsius. I would assume probably closer to like a negative 20. It's around 2 point something of Celsius equals 1 Fahrenheit. So if you were to divide 32 by half, be around 16. So probably around 20 below Celsius would be the pretty good translation. Notice, or maybe a bit less, but around that range. Apologize about my inaccuracy with that, but that is definitely adjustable. You can see that, as I mentioned, the contrast will be pretty remarkable. This is the day times. I mean, you can see that the nights across some of these locations not even getting above 0, or getting much below 0, -6, -9, -10. During the day, miserable temperatures. Much of the southeast hot. Again, this is assuming a certain track, a certain forecast, but it looks to be the general trend. Way colder across the north and much warmer across the south than normal, furthering the contrast. But as you push this into the longer range, you can see that the GFS does put out a bit of warmer air across the United States. Let's take a look at the European model, show what it means in terms of like exact temperatures. By the way, this is the snowfall outlook for the next 240 hours across the United States and Canada. British Columbia, Alberta, quite a bit of snow. Montana, Wyoming, into the Dakotas, Montana, the southeastern Canada, the northeast, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Labrador, all those locations seeing a good shot of snow, and even further south into Nebraska, Kansas, maybe Iowa, Wisconsin. So definitely interesting. Maybe northern Illinois, a few snowflakes seems about the best way to put it at this point. 2-meter temperature anomalies, shaded, so the actual temperature. I already showed you the anomalies. That was this model, the ECMWF, which I talked about at the beginning. Now I want to show you the Fahrenheit. you could see, again, the cooler air kind of driving itself away while the warmer infiltrates into this late weekend. By Monday, late Sunday, early Monday, we start seeing the cool air trying to make its way back in. But again, as mentioned before, the warm air does make a pretty big comeback and kind of pushes this front back to the north. It's almost like two sides at war, and kind of like World War One, barely moving sides, pretty much a stalemate many times. And where exactly it lines up, a little tiny 2 mile shift in terms of the weather, I guess, if you will, if these were fronts, could mean 100 mile shift in actual land. I don't know. I'm trying to make a little comparison here. A shift like from here to here isn't much in terms of weather, but it is in terms of population, city, and people. So you could see that it's obviously all proportional to size. These air masses are huge. Notice cool air starts making its way late next week, and once it does, it's really nothing stopping it. Notice cold front, clear cold front, big storm up here, and we just see the temperatures go crashing even as far south as much of the southeast, maybe Tennessee, upper Georgia, and Alabama, Mississippi, seeing some frost. These locations just seeing full-on winter in the mountains where the snow cover is well into the negatives. So definitely interesting weather. We'll have to keep this monitored for you guys. And I do want to quickly show you the Climate Prediction Center. And eventually, the 8 to 14 day outlook. I don't know why I said let's start off by looking at the 6 to 10 day outlook, valid from October 22nd through the 26th. And you can see that they show really dark colors. That's a 90%, I think, right there. It's pretty much as confident as they ever get about showing temperatures either below or above, and they are pretty confident in above average temperatures across the southeast and east. A lot of locations in that battle zone. Whether or not this shifts a few miles this way or that way could mean a big difference for many folks, but unfortunately that's not really able to be predicted at this point. Precip, you can see it's above for a good portion of the eastern 2/3 of the country, a bit below across the northwest and the Four Corners. If this lines up with the cold weather, that could produce some snow. 8 to 14 outlook, very similar, a bit more of that cold air across kind of the eastern half of the country, pushing a little bit more east. Warm air across the southwest, a bit more limited warm air across the southeast, but definitely more confident in that cool air. And the precip slides a little bit further to the west or east. Above average slides off to the ocean, and then the below average slides in from the ocean, if you will. So pretty evenly divided here. These are a bit usually more inaccurate than the temperature ones, but usually they do a pretty good job. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you all guys in the next episode. See ya. Bye.